When we think about what makes a country grow, we usually talk about things like roads, buildings, or the economy. But what about the people, the ones who come up with the big ideas that fuel everything else? Well, today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating 50-year review of doctoral education in Uganda and look at how a nation actually goes about building its next generation of top-level thinkers.
Okay, so let's start with a question that honestly has two totally opposite answers depending on where you're standing. In a lot of Western countries, you hear this constant chatter about a PhD glut, right? That there are just too many people with doctorates. But is that really the story everywhere?
Not even close. And this is where you really see what we're calling the PhD paradox. While some countries are worried about having too many PhDs, the research we're looking at today makes it crystal clear that for most of Sub-Saharan Africa, it's the exact opposite problem. There's a huge shortage of these highly skilled people who are needed to teach in universities and, drive real innovation.
All right, so with that bigger picture in mind, let's zoom in on our case study, Uganda. We're about to unpack the findings from a huge study that gives us a 50-year checkup on the state of its doctoral education.
The very first number that jumps out from the report is, well, it's pretty staggering. Over a 50-year span across all its universities, Uganda awarded a total of 1,197 PhDs. Now, to put that into perspective for you, universities in the United States awarded over 50,000 in just 1 year back in 2012. So right away, you get a real sense of the scale of the challenge here.
So where did those PhDs come from? Well, the data shows an incredible concentration in one place. Of all the doctorates from public universities, almost 90% of them, they all came from just one institution, Makerere University. For decades, it's basically been the single engine for the entire country's doctoral training.
And the data points to another major gap. Over that same 50-year period, for every 4 doctorates awarded, more than 3 went to men. That's a huge gender disparity, and it shows there's another really important challenge here in building a diverse group of top researchers.
Okay, so we've seen the numbers. A low number of graduates overall, most of them coming from one place, and a big gender gap. So the question is, why? What's going on underneath the surface? Let's dig into the root causes that the research points to.
For a long time, the main way to get a PhD in Uganda was through what's called the PhD by research only. You can think of it like an old-school apprenticeship. One student, one expert supervisor, and they work together for years to produce one giant, book-like thesis. And while that model can be really good for deep research, the report argues it has some serious drawbacks for meeting the needs of today.
And here's the thing, it's not just one issue. It's a whole bunch of challenges that are all connected. You've got that traditional PhD model that often doesn't connect to what businesses or the government actually need. There's no real system in place for teaching practical skills, like managing a project or communicating complex ideas. And for a long time, the whole system has relied heavily on international funding, which isn't always stable or even focused on national priorities. So, when you add all of those pieces together, you get the picture the report paints. A system that, even with everyone's best efforts, is just struggling to produce the number and the type of high-level thinkers that a modern, growing country really needs. But this report isn't just about pointing out the problems. It's not just a diagnosis. It's also a prescription. After laying out all the challenges, it gives a really clear, practical roadmap for how to reinvent the whole system. So the plan for moving forward really stands on 4 big pillars. First, offer different kinds of PhDs for different kinds of needs, not just the traditional one. Second, create strong national standards so a PhD means the same high quality everywhere. Third, and this one is so important, deliberately build connections between universities and the business world. And finally, find sustainable ways for students and researchers to get international experience.
What we're really talking about here is a complete shift in how you even think about a PhD. It's about moving away from this idea that a doctorate is just one narrow path to becoming a professor. Instead, the goal is to build a whole ecosystem of doctoral training that prepares leaders for academia, for industry, and for public service.
So let's step back and bring this all home. Why does any of this matter? I mean, why should we care so much about this one specific part of the education system?
Because it's about so much more than what happens inside a university. At its very core, this is about self-reliance. It's about making sure a country has its own homegrown talent, its own intellectual firepower, to solve its own unique problems and chart its own course in a world that, let's face it, runs on knowledge.
You know, there's this fantastic quote cited in the report from the academic Mahmoud Mamdani, and it just says it all. He talks about the need to grow our own timber. And that just perfectly captures what this is all about.
Because that's the end game, right? Fixing doctoral education isn't the goal in itself. It's the tool you use to cultivate the people, the innovators, the policy experts, the leaders who are actually going to build the country's future.
So we'll just leave you with this last thought to chew on. When you strip everything else away, investing in this highest level of education is really about investing in a nation's ability to think for itself, and what could possibly be more important than that?